Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Inside Story, a production from the Agency for Public Information. I am Sheridan Lewis. On this week's program, we bring you more on the celebrations of the 250th anniversary of the Botanical Gardens. Stay with us. The program continues in just a moment.
Our natural history includes the long-tailed white tropic birds that migrate to our skies and rock faces, the North Atlantic humpback whale that comes to our warm waters to give birth to and nurse their young, the critically endangered hawksbill turtle, and the St. Vincent parrot. These are all creatures that the National Trust seeks to protect for future generations. For more than 40 years, the National Trust has worked to save St. Vincent and the Grenadines' most beloved places, landscapes, and seascapes where great moments of history took place. We work together with communities to value and protect important pieces of our cultural community, national history, and environment, such as the series of decorated Saladoy pots found in Clear Valley, signifying that St. Vincent's civilization is almost 2,000 years old. We do this all because the next generation needs to know our stories, as they will only inherit the places and species we choose to save today. We urge you to plant a tree under whose shade you never plan to sit. Join the National Trust today.
Protecting our marine environment,
our forest, our wildlife for our children.
Pollution of our rivers and beaches, deforestation and overfishing threaten to destroy our biodiversity. Protected areas are set aside by law to protect these fragile ecosystems, which provide us with water, food, electricity, and recreation. Tobago Keys Marine Park, Kings Hill Forest Reserve, and Milligan Key Wildlife Reserve are examples of our local protected areas. Be inspired and help preserve what is naturally ours.
Let's value nature. Protected areas protect life.
A message from the Environmental Management Department and the National Parks, Rivers and Beaches Authority.
Welcome back. Celebrating 250 years of biodiversity and conservation, the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Botanical Gardens is dubbed the oldest gardens in the Western Hemisphere. To commemorate this illustrious heritage, the 250th Anniversary Committee has organized 1 year of activities to honor this important milestone. The activity for July was a scientific symposium held at the NIS conference room and a panel discussion on July 1. The theme for the 250th anniversary of the Botanical Garden Symposium was socio-economic development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines through scientific contribution of the Botanical Gardens over 250 years. The symposium heard presentations from local and external speakers. Topics featured in the symposium included the history and contribution of the Botanical Gardens in the Caribbean. A panel discussion followed the symposium, and the audience willingly shared comments and gave insightful recommendations for the future of the gardens.
I would start by saying I strongly suggest that every Vincentian should have a guided tour of the Botanical Garden at least once. I remember I have always been familiar with the Botanical Garden because I see myself as a romanticist, I'm a romantic. But I've always been going to the garden, but never really took a guided tour. And last year in October, I decided I'm going to take a guided tour. And that experience, it remains fresh in my mind. And I'm telling you that I am still moved today when I reflect on some of those experiences. I could remember, for instance, when I touched this feathery, silky flower that I was told was used in ancient Egypt as paper. I mean, that was an amazing experience. Right away, I thought of Imhotep, one of the fathers of modern engineering. And I'm thinking of him maybe back in that day. sketching one of the grand pyramids, and something that came from what I'm touching.
First, my name is Andrew Lockhart, Superintendent of Marine and Terrestrial Parks with the National Parks, Rivers and Beaches Authority. I myself, having some close links with the Botanical Gardens as a forestry officer over 2.5 decades. I would have supervised my first stint as a supervisor was at the Botanical Gardens, the forestry department, having a nursery there over 30 years or so, playing plants, Pinus caribae, the bloomer home between St. Vincent and St. Lucia, for the various reforestation program across, primarily across mainland St. Vincent. I have a few member panel here with me, so I'm serving as the moderator for the panel. On my immediate left is Dr. Nairi Zerega from the Chicago Botanical Gardens, would have been one of the feature presenters this morning. Next to Dr. Zerega, the other gentleman at the head table is Mr. Fitzgerald Providence, the current Director of Forestry. Mr. Providence is a trained forester in the elements of forest management, wildlife biology, environmental leadership, and natural resource valuation, among others. To my farthest left is a lady who, anytime tourism is mentioned, whether it be in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at the level of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, CARICOM, or even at the level of the Organization of American States, you will hear the name Viran Brayton.
We need to bring the gardens up from just being a garden of beauty and where people run about and play and go to study, but study there for their exams. They need to go there to study their plants, unique plants, and not design the gardens in a way that it will be another display garden, but a garden with themes, with educational purpose, and going back to the origin, that we as Vincentians can go there and learn what's the importance of the nutmeg tree, what's the importance of all the different plants. And I know Mr. Shallow has already started that work in terms of bringing back the true meaning or the true purpose of the botanical gardens and really make it a botanical gardens and not a gardens, and which true would become in terms of having plants in an ex-situ program, developing what is there and adding benefits, including a herbarium where we have herbarium collections where we'd also collect the seeds of our endemics and all our plants that exist in St. Vincent. So just in closing, our impact is to improve for the future because it's needed with the changing environmental situation around us. We need to have a plant conservation program to protect our endemism, the uniqueness of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and other tropical countries. Thank you.
Some of the areas of potential development that I see here are the following. This is in tourism. Well, generally. In the field of science, the twinning of our gardens with other gardens and with overseas universities to develop working tours and assignments here in SVG. And these would, of course, not be free. These would be revenue earners. The botanic tours, both for amateurs and professionals. The development of activities, for example, and this is the touristy part. Excuse me. Food among the flowers. Alfresco dining with limited numbers. Pan among the flowers. Pan concerts, again with limited numbers. open-air theater, or the history of the gardens could be transformed into a play that could be performed at times throughout the year in the Botanic Gardens. Yoga in the park, poetry in bloom, tales among the trees, storytelling. Again, when I heard the story of the breadfruit, you can imagine this being told by a storyteller in the gardens and to children in schools. I think this has so much tremendous potential. And of course, classical music shows. And these must not be one-off shows. But time must be given to undertake the required research, planning, and actual product development and marketing strategies. Furthermore, these product enhancements must be given the time to grow in popularity for both locals and overseas visitors, remembering that success will not come overnight.
Now, I am glad that you have connected St. Vincent Breadfruit to Tahiti. And I hope you can stay here, and analyze our breadfruit. Because our breadfruit, we can make flour, we could make bread, cake, pie, salad, all those kind of things we could do with it. And it was nice if Mrs. Shallow could organize a breadfruit festival with all these delicious dishes, soft music, local music with soft drinks. No alcohol should be in the garden. And another thing, I don't know what is the criteria to go in the garden these days, because it should be 18 years and over that you paid, so that the children could get in the gardens and do the study, and they could do various things, visiting things. As a scout, I remember taking people to the gardens to see the gardens, the Fort Charlotte. Then I later was trained by the police as a tourist police. The Grandies, Fall Billies, Black Pointer, Montreal Garden, various places. The gardens is a very interesting place. It's relaxing.
What is your interest in the breadfruit coming out from Chicago, or what? Because there's no connection with St. Vincent. And the second part is, if you're aware of the current work that is being done at the University of the West Indies on breadfruit.
All right, thank you for that question. My interest in breadfruit does not seem apparent, given that we certainly can't grow it in Chicago, or actually really any part of the United States. It can grow in the southern tip of Florida, but if you have a hard winter, it will die. So we really don't have any breadfruit, apart from in greenhouses. I became interested from an evolutionary perspective. I'm interested in plant evolution, and in particular the family the breadfruit belongs to, which is the Moraceae family, which includes things like figs and mulberries, and then of course the breadfruit. And so I started at it from that angle. And the genus the breadfruit belongs to, Artocarpus, has about 70 species in it. And they're all native to South and Southeast Asia. And so what we find here in the Caribbean are ones that have just been introduced, mostly the breadfruit and the jackfruit. So a lot of what I do focuses on the family and the genus and from an evolutionary perspective. But that being said, I'm also very interested in domestication of crops. And so having developed an interest in that group, breadfruit was a natural crop to consider and study further from an aspect of domestication and crop diversity, and also underutilized crops. Breadfruit is one of hundreds or thousands of underutilized crops out there that really hold the potential in a lot of different parts of the world to provide an important, more sustainable food source that doesn't require the large energy inputs that the three major crops of the world require. And there's a lot more. So those are, in general, underutilized crops deserve more attention. So that's the first question. The West Indies, the University of the West Indies. So are you the one in Trinidad and Tobago? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. This weekend, starting on July 5th, they're hosting an international breadfruit conference at the university. And So I am aware of some of the work that they're doing and have been in communication with some of the folks there. Yeah, Dr. Laura Roberts Nkrumah, exactly. And I've never met her in person. We've only communicated via email. And I'm very much looking forward to the conference and being in a room filled with people who have a very strong interest in breadfruit and various aspects of it. A lot of the focus of this particular conference is going to be on, I guess, commercialization aspects. I'll be speaking there too, not to that as much as you saw from what I presented earlier and summarized today. That's not my main focus. I'm interested in it, and I work with people who do that. But so I'm really keen on learning more about what's going on. So yeah, I'm aware that it's going on, but I don't know all the details. But are you do you know quite a bit about it as well, or?
Michael Gloucester. Yeah, he is there. And it's interesting. I just want to, since I'm on it, this is the last thing. Now, I was reading through the literature, and they were talking about the reluctance of the people here, especially so the slaves, the blacks, to accept breadfruit as a diet, as part of their diet. Do you think that it is because the plant didn't come with them, or they didn't come with the plant? Is it easier to accept it when the plant accompanies you, as in the case of people coming out of India, bringing the mango with them? But here, the people were coming out of West Africa, and the plant wasn't coming with them, it was coming from a different part. Comment on that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I certainly don't have the answer that might be more appropriate for somebody looking at social aspects, but that's a very good observation and quite likely. Certainly, in any case, when something new is introduced, it takes a while, and it takes sometimes other people who are familiar with it showing you what to do with it and how they do it. And that didn't occur in this case because the plants were dropped off. And then off they went. And so there was no Tahitian or somebody from Polynesia to really talk about how they use the plant.
Over the years, when we're trying to develop what we call a breadfruit festival, it started this on the time when Miss Butchie was walking. We used to have in certain different parts of the country, but because of the economic crisis now, we're trying to develop what we call every 1st of August, you normally have a breadfruit fest down at Leeward. And it appeared to me, one time a guy was telling me, but you talking about your black African conscious man, and you promoting breadfruit, and breadfruit was slave food. So I say, yes, that was an independent country now. And we have to take anything the Master King left and turn it to use to our purpose. Because that's in all civilization, that's how it is. Because the Roman influence still there, and the Western wall. Because when England run out the Romans, they mash up everything that have human purpose. So we must bear that in mind, that not because the slave master bring the breadfruit here, we as independent people could take it and make use of it for our benefit.
Okay. So I have two persons. Third, while you collect your thoughts, let me just interject here on the same breadfruit issue. And Mr. Isaacs, for those persons who may or may not have known that Mr. Isaacs was a former chief agricultural officer, and he happened to, well, unfortunately, he happened to be the standing chief at the time when there was a major transition of the botanical gardens from a center for plant breeding and conservation towards the tourism element. Yes, so he would have seen that transformation. But earlier on, I flew out the idea that in promoting the breadfruit, and notwithstanding, I know that some people still have the perception, as Mr. Commerce intimating, that breadfruit is still linked with slavery, and even the acceptance of that as part of our diet, it's still hard in coming to some persons with that historical element in mind.
Is it really
Going forward, the promotion and marketing of breadfruit, we have to deal with that particular nuance. But more substantively, I am promoting the idea that beyond the breadfruit itself, we need to market the whole tree. Yes. You know, from the fodder, from the timber, from the breadfruit as a conservation along our riparian zones. If you take a cursory journey into any village community, the largest breadfruit trees are those that run along waterways. Yes, but there's a more significant with that. With climate change and all of the torrential the storms and so on we're having, the breadfruit is vulnerable. A lot of the trees are overgrown, they're tall, so you cannot even market the fruit up top. And so here's a challenge again to the Ministry of Agriculture, the tree crop unit in particular, to please come on board and to market and to manage the genotype that we currently have. There's another element too that I learned that we have about 30 plus varieties of the 32. 32 islands and keys, 32 varieties of breadfruit. Yes? So we need to market those things again and to reflect the diversity in our people. And then as we talk about the other parks and so on, we need to have all of these cultivars in one place as public exhibitions. And so we could have an appreciation of the different cultivars, perhaps doing some research, where do they grow best, what the different climatic zones we may find. What about their taste, the fibrous content, the colors and all of that. Because if you talk about marketing, these are things that are very important. We know, so that's why you have a yellowish tomato, that's why you have a deep red one, you have one sort of a elliptical, yes? So we need to start doing some research into what what's the preferences, if indeed there is. Okay, Connie?
Yeah, Andrew, my thing is just an annex to what you were saying, and folks who know me would know I tried to throw a little twist on the discussion. We talk about promoting breadfruit. What are we promoting? I'll ask a question in context of this statement. It is my opinion that breadfruit as a staple, as a lucrative transformed diet or food type is well accepted in St. Vincent. Every home eat breadfruit. Every restaurant serve breadfruit. Every picnic have breadfruit. Every hotel carry breadfruit. I don't think the promotion of breadfruit rests around the diet or the whole question of the gastronomical benefits to breadfruit is not that. I think if we're going to promote breadfruit, it has to be in terms of its conservation, maybe in terms of its genetic diversity, and a bit of the history. I think is missing out to go with the food. But I think if we're going to push the economic aspects of it, certainly, and from that perspective, Andrew. But to say we're promoting breadfruit as a food, it's a no-brainer. That is done.
Why I would disagree with that, what Mr. Cornelius said, is that the food that is used, how breadfruit is used in probably 3 or 4 different ways. That's it. And there are so many ways that breadfruit can be used, and that's why we, in the Hotel and Tourism Association, have published a recipe book on breadfruit. And that is how you would get breadfruit to become even more popular.
First of all, I want to really congratulate the organizing committee on a fantastic job in promoting the Botanical Gardens' 250th anniversary. And I think we ought to give them a round of applause for that. Secondly, I want to start with this morning. I was taken back by the presentation of Mr. Baisden, the wealth of historical knowledge that he has on the subject of where we came from and where we are, and the prospects that could come out of the Botanical Gardens. While I'm in that state of mind, I'm very hopeful that part of the project monies that we have associated with this project, that we would use Mr. Baisden and some of the other historians to publish a revised copy of a book, a strong book that we could use as a tourism product to promote our botanical gardens and the breadfruit plant.
My name is Andrea Latchman. I work with the Ministry of Agriculture. And not straying from the topic of breadfruit, but looking at gardens and listening to the symposium this morning, where are we going from here? How are we going to get persons or the younger generation interested in the history of the botanical gardens? I remember as a child, and as Stapleton said, out of sight, out of mind. But I want to put it another way. Near to church, far from God. Because he's living at New Montrose. The botanical gardens is just a stone throw away. I grew up in the same New Montrose. And I could remember as a child, I don't know how often it is done now, but as a child growing up with your parents, you look forward to Sunday afternoon. Your parents take you there. You just walk, you look at different flowers, they explain certain things to you, a brush and comb. I always look forward to getting a brush and comb to take home, just to smell it. Even if I didn't know the botanical name or whatever, look at different flowers and plants. How are we going to get people? Because obviously, we would like to explore what is in our own country and know our history, and don't let outsiders or visitors come and tell us what we have and appreciate what we have more than we do. We're supposed to be the first and go out and sell what we have. And that's the only way I think that tourists would be attracted, because if you go and you tell them the history of what you have here and how the botanical garden started and where it started and what plants we have, they get some form of interest. As a matter of fact, when you start explaining to them, they start picturing, or they get in a vivid imagination or a picture of what you're trying to portray. Obviously, they want to explore. They want to come and see what you're saying in reality. Then we are saying, we're the older folks, we're going home. And it's to get the younger generation, and it shouldn't just start from a secondary or tertiary level. I think it should start from primary school, where you have projects that these children must do from the botanic gardens. Like you have projects set up where they have to go and research history from the botanic gardens, and the only way they can do that is to go there and get the information and do their researches. In that way, it will encourage them, I think, more to go at the gardens, and you see strange things and you try to learn their botanical names, even with agriculture itself. Because you go to university, sometimes you see these plants, you see these trees, you never learn what the species, where they came from, until when you go there and find out their biological names and all of that, and scientific names and their uses and all that sort of stuff. So my thing is that, what are we going to do as persons involved with the portraying of the botanical gardens, or to its heritage, and to preserving it, and to selling it, even to attract tourists to come here? So that is my main concern. I want to know where we go from there, because we need to really maintain the values of what we have as a historical venture.
But in terms of, I think Mr. Stapleton mentioned, in terms of the prisons right now, I know the plans are to make it a museum, and the courtyard should be more greener. But every day between 7 to 5, it's just covered with metal, which is a lot of cars. So it's a parking space. It's conflicts with getting it more greener. But I think there are plans to make it a greener space, and we do need the greener space in St. Vincent, in the Kingstown. But I think Vincentians, a lot of Vincentians don't respect the term green space, because just this week I was passing Courthouse, and there's a bougainvillea plant on the side next to Paul's Avenue, and I just peered in, and under the bougainvillea was a whole set of garbage. Somebody used it to dump. And green spaces are like that. And it's something I have to research in our legislation, public health legislation. If you have a green space and the bush is a little bit too high, you're kind of breaking a law. And I need to research it, because it needs to be up updated. It's an whole lot that needs to be updated, because you would have someone with a open space that doesn't look green, doesn't bring benefit to the environment, but it gets a better grade than someone who has plants, a lot of plants. And I know because I've experienced that by them talking to me at my yard in terms of my plants. But the thing is that we don't respect what green spaces are about in our country. Just like we've been taught, like the breadfruit was always negative. The coconut was usually the broadly negative about it being full of cholesterol. Now coconut is one. Coconut oil is the most valuable oil, one of the most valuable oils in the world. And because we're being de-educated wrong in terms of from what our local knowledge is in terms of the values of coconut oil. A baby always smells like coconut oil because it's better than baby oil, because you put coconut oil on your skin and it will wash off. You put synthetic baby oil, you have a lot of soap to get it off. What is it doing to your skin? And this knowledge we need to keep in terms of it. And I think if we bring our knowledge better, and the Botanical Gardens has that potential to bring all us back to our local knowledge and the benefits from breadfruit to different things, because as I'm hearing from I'm learning every day. You learn something that breadfruit is similar to cassava in certain things, and I know the Food and Agricultural Organization is now pushing cassava, and actually they're encouraging beer companies to use it in the making of beers. I don't know how it works, but in Africa and so on, what could breadfruit be doing? So there we have, again, that answers the question about the food basket and the value added to these products. And if we bring all those local knowledge, and I think I know working with the National Trust, we're looking at building the Creators House in terms of a museum to build up some of that knowledge in a herbarium and different things like that. And I wish we can do that, because that's where the knowledge come back, and you'll attract people to the gardens once they know something is there for them to benefit. Right now we have a conflict with the entrance fee, but you can make monies in a different ways, like experience of the Smithsonian in Washington. There's no entrance fee, but it's one of the areas of conservation, a lot of knowledge. But by the time you go through there, you spend a lot of money in terms of what they offer you, in terms of gifts and tokens and different things like that. But also people have to understand that you have to pay for something that is valuable. And I think we need to also promote that. So we need to respect our green spaces and make St. Vincent, Kingston particularly, a green city again. Right now it's becoming a heat island. You walk through Kingston in midday, and the buildings are just radiating heat at you, even after 7 in the night, because they just capture the heat. And we need to bring back, in our tropical countries, we don't appreciate the greening. If you go to North America, summer, you're walking through, they actually bring heavy pots and lay them in the middle of the street with flowers, because they don't like the dead of winter, but they appreciate the beauty of spring. Right now we have all our white cedars are in bloom, pretty flowers all over. And I never see a front page of an article in terms of the beauty of our flowering trees. I'm thinking of speaking to one of the editors who I know of doing something like that. The yellow puis, the pink puis, the white cedars. Yeah, all those beautiful blooms. Someone posted on Facebook a shot of the Northern Range around Monks in Benedict with the pink puis, and I was like, where's that? That looks like the apple blossoms of New York or something like that. So we need to appreciate our green spaces again and bring it into our education system in terms of it. And seeing green spaces are things you dump in. You put a flower pot in tongue, what it ends up with, a lot of garbage in it. And that is, we need to change those mentalities in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
I remember I have always been familiar with the Botanical Garden, because I see myself as a romanticist. I'm a romantic. But I've always been going to the garden, but never really took a guided tour. And last year in October, I decided I'm going to take a guided tour. And that experience, it remains fresh in my mind. And I'm telling you that I am still moved today when I reflect on some of those experiences. I could remember, for instance, when I touched this feathery, silky flower that I was told was used in ancient Egypt as paper. I mean, that was an amazing experience. Right away, I thought of Imhotep, one of the fathers of modern engineering. And I'm thinking of him maybe back in that day, sketching one of the grand pyramids, and did something that came from what I'm touching. That was just transformational. It was an amazing experience. Even with the Jacaranda tree. I mean, before going to the botanical gardens, the jacaranda, I had only been heard of that in African literature, in West African poetry, where it was used as a symbol of West African nationhood. So to go and stand in the shade of that tree, man, just being there, I felt a communal bond, with my brothers in Africa. And I remember too, going to this tree, that the colloquial term for it is the naked Indian tree. And they were saying it was used, to make canoes and so forth. And those are amazing history and experiences. And I mentioned the colloquial interpretation because I think too, this adds to the experience. Because yes, you have the scientific names, but when you go around with these guides and they give you the colloquial interpretation, I remember posting on Facebook after my visit that today I went to the botanical garden and I saw a naked Indian standing behind a peacock's tail amid the bulrushes. And it was amazing the amount of likes that I got. And the comments, because everyone was curious, man, and what is it about? And then I took them along. No. Yes. These are the colloquial names of the trees in the gardens. And I began to encourage my friends, my co-workers, to take a guided tour of the botanical gardens. But that experience also brought something to me and we spoke a lot about trying to preserve the history of the gardens. And I think that we have to involve the creative arts in this, making it more exciting and so forth. Have children excited about going to gardens and learning about the botanical gardens. The baobab, a popular tree in Madagascar, feature that is featured in the Madagascar, right? And I could imagine, you have children around the baobab tree, and you're giving them the history, and you're saying, look, remember the Madagascar movie and so forth? Connection, because when you go to the botanical garden, it is just not an experience about Vincent and its culture, but it's a global culture, and that to me is really amazing. So, and I think that Miss Burton was spot on with her suggestions. As I said before, I mean, I'm a romantic. I believe in romanticism in the botanical garden. I love your suggestions with the dinners and evening of poetry and so forth. And I think those are things that we can seriously look into. Beautiful experiences. So all in all, I think that the botanical garden is extremely marketable. When you consider the science of it and how it intertwines with our history and the native nuances that you find interwoven in all that, I think it is very marketable.
But what I have been hearing is a lot of repeated concerns that issues were addressed on earlier. So I'll just try to clean up some of them, may answer the ones possible to answer. And I think it's rightfully so that I do it, especially within my capacity as the curator. And I'll just go according to the ones that I made jottings on. Medicinal or / original purpose versus tourism seems to be a repetitive topic. And what we are doing right now, and I want to emphasize that, what we currently doing, right? Present continuous. And what we have envisioned, what we have planned, is not an either or neither nor situation, but rather both. And this is how it works. and this is how we have it planned, specifically myself. We are sticking with the original purpose of the botanical gardens. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we're doing the agro-historical plot. All of the monocrops we did throughout our development as a nation, colonial and post-colonial and so forth. Arrowroot, cotton, banana, cocoa, sugar cane, all of these things will be inside of there. A lot of these will be there. That's one plot, for example, and we're working on that. We have already planted cotton, the Sea Island cotton, as I mentioned, and even as some historians would have noted, that it helped fund the World War on the colonial side at one point, because we had the best cotton in the world. The empire, quote unquote, had a huge trump card to play around with, right? So we have that in the botanical garden. After many decades not being there, we have it there. So that's building content, because that's the point where we're going at. When I talked about financing and many other things that we talked about here, how I see it being addressed and how we are addressing it right now is by building on the content of the gardens, being it in the different plots, being it in the colorful flowers that the gentleman said is missing, which I do agree. The aesthetic appeal we need to work on, but that must not be the primary focus, and it is not. It will come as a byproduct as we go about putting in back the medicinal plants, putting in back a lot of the species that we have lost, and venturing out and making new contacts with newer gardens like Chicago, as we have done now, Missouri Botanical Gardens, as we have, and many other different gardens that I will not mention now, that we are in contact with in and around the region in particular. We are currently establishing plant exchange and so forth, and many other activities. So as we go about doing that and bringing in these newer species, and the ones that we lost, yes. In terms of the layout, the landscape layout in the gardens, we will do it in such a way that it will bring a fresh aesthetic appeal to the gardens. So whether persons who come for tourism purposes or otherwise will also be able to appreciate it in that light, though that is not our primary purpose. All right? So it's a yes to the original and the tourist, just to put it that way. There is absolutely no conflict, not in my mind at all as curator. All works perfectly well. It's like trying to say agriculture or tourism. If more tourists come, I think we have more mouths to feed. Right, okay, great. Swine to Fine, that video, I'm long ahead of the gentleman that made the suggestion that we should put it in schools and so on and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, we have a Facebook page and we do have our website. When I saw the video yesterday for the first time, we just got it from Dr. Honeychurch, who made a valiant effort to get it to us as soon as possible. I decided to put it on our Facebook page and our website. It will be on our website within the next coming days or so. But besides that, besides the social media aspect, which I have noticed is one of the biggest ways of targeting this young generation, this present young generation, we would definitely take up the idea and trying to go into schools, because I like that, as it was mentioned, not just a video, but probably doing something on a smaller scale of what was done today and really try to impact the schools. But as I said, what we are currently doing, because I don't think people have really heard it enough and realized that it is not something that we are hoping to, it's not a pie in the sky. We are on the ground running. We're not running as fast as we ourselves or what persons would like to see, but we are getting there, and we are gaining ground and gaining speed. So definitely something like this. So for example, we have students come into the gardens, as I emphasize, for a guided tour. As was the previous culture, students would come and it would be more or less of a picnic, so to speak. And our emphasis was for students, the teachers, and parents, as I mentioned in the figures. Parents also accompanied the schools. And Ms. Britton, preschools is where we started. Our target was preschools. We planted the seed way early. Yes. They may not be able to take up everything, but they will, but some interaction of the idea. I remember I went to this place many years ago. I was this little, and they carry us around and they say plenty. I can't remember, but we planted. We don't know where the next curator is coming from. We don't know where the next Anderson or De Freitas or even Shallow coming from. But we hope that it is within the seeds that we plant now, especially within this 2015 year. The other issue of smaller gardens outside of the botanical gardens in specific, I remember my colleague shedding some light on it, Mr. Lockhart there as the moderator, and some research that I did as well too. A lot of the gardens that you see around Kingston, and I'll start from the roundabout, I'll start from behind the airport, I will start to Sally Springs, I'll start the bus stop at Camden Park, and other little things. That actually was started as outlets or mini gardens by one of our past curators, Calvin Nichols. And his great attempt to, let me be a lexicographer for a second, to greenify Kingston. All right? Now, this, as Mr. Providence, the director of forestry, just hinted on, it's a battle within Kingston. I have met with other private persons and private institutions and so forth who have also tried to greenify Kingston. Case in point, but it's not within our nature and culture as yet. But we are getting there. When we will get there.
Even as we talk about the greening of Kingston from the botanical gardens also suffer tremendously from a revenue generating standpoint. From a lot of competition by private enterprise. To the introduction of a lot of exotic plants, horticultural plants and so on. But with competition, it's supposed to cement in us more creativity and so on. But that's an idealism. Sometimes it doesn't occur, right? Okay, so we are at that point.
Sir, just one thing. Why can't we get into the garden after 250 years? The most beautiful garden become a World Heritage Site.
So that's an interesting question. The intent, that intent is in place. In 2012, May of 2012, the National Trust, the Smithsonian Grenadines National Trust, hosted a similar forum right here in this hall too, to start putting together a proposal to have the botanical gardens declared as a World Heritage Site. In terms of the status of that proposal, because by new UNESCO proposal, they are not done overnight. They're very long engaging process. So I do not know what is the status of that proposal to date.
Before we told the story to go, before
According to Richard A. Howard, author of St. Vincent Botanic Gardens, The Early Years, late in the 18th century, while France and Great Britain were vying for control of the sugar-rich Caribbean islands, the first program of plant introductions in the British West Indies was instituted on this small island of St. Vincent in June 1765. General Robert Melville plan for a botanic gardens was primarily to provide medicinal plants for the military as well as to improve the life of the colony. The garden was to serve as a repository for all useful plants that could grow on St. Vincent, but also in contrast to the botanic gardens at Kew, Oxford, Cambridge, and European Botanic Gardens at the time, as a nursery to be distributed around St. Vincent and to other islands. The St. Vincent and the Grenadines Botanical Gardens truly fits the 250th anniversary theme, Botanical Gardens from SVG to the World, celebrating 250 years of biodiversity and conservation. Here's where we end this evening's presentation from the Agency for Public Information, Inside Story. Let's hope that you join us again next week for another edition. Good evening. Have a great weekend.